I survived China for 14 years. And by survived, I mean I had one hell of an adventure. The thing is, it wasn't easy. This is my story. What you're seeing here is my very first video on the SerpentZA channel, which I posted in 2008. It's me messing about, buying some baozi in the morning, riding around the local urban village right next to my apartment complex, and working on an old scooter. However, what some of you might not know is that I actually had another channel before I made this video, and it was called the PSP Traveler. The PSP Traveler was kind of a fun little experiment. I had just invited somebody to come from South Africa to come and work and live in China. It helped him get there. And I thought, I need to show this guy around and show him all the interesting spots in the city. So why not make some videos about it, you know? And, you know, we just bought PSPs, you know, the Sony handhelds. And there's a camera that comes along with the PSP. So we thought, wouldn't it be fun to walk around and record everything on a PSP camera? I mean, you have to understand, this is 2007. This is a long time ago. Smartphones, I mean, the iPhone had only just been released in 2007, I believe. And prior to that, there were no real good phones or cameras that you could go film anything decent on. So this was just a fun little experiment. And so I took him around the city to various places, and it actually turned into more of a kind of a little fun exploration documentary type series to show people about China. We discussed things like Mid-Autumn Festival and all that kind of nonsense. But of course, it really took a lot for me to get to this point in the first place. So we have a lot to talk about today, guys. I've hit 1 million subscribers thanks to all of you out there. It's something that still hasn't really sunk in yet, and I'm just blown away. A lot of people have asked me how I actually got to China in the first place, and you know, what got me there, and how I survived in the beginning. And I think I have a very different story to most people. At least most people that I know that I've spoken to. And that is, I knew almost nothing about China when I first went to China. I had no plans to go to China. I had no reason to go to China, and I didn't have any interest in the language or the culture or anything like that. What happened was, I mean, I'd always been fascinated by Japanese culture. That's something I'd always enjoyed, and you know, there's been aspects of Indian culture that I've always appreciated too, but China never really was on the radar for me. I was working as a freelance IT guy. I had my own business in South Africa, right, in my 20s. And what I used to do is drive around and go to people's houses and offices and things like that. And I would be pretty much a mobile support technician, but not just to fix a printer or something. You know, I would do enterprise level networks as well and all that kind of nonsense. And that was my jam, and I loved it. I loved working with computers and IT and all that stuff. However, I had this one particular client, and a bit of a nutcase, to be honest, but he used to, and I suppose he had to be because of the business he was in, but he used to run probably still does run a security company. And he would do all sorts of things like offer VIP escorts when people would come to South Africa and all that kind of dodgy stuff. But on top of that, he also used to import security cameras from China. Okay, and he'd set up security cameras, and that's how I got involved. Is I'd be the guy who'd go on site and, you know, set up the servers and set up all the security cameras and make them all work, that kind of thing, right? So, anyway, he invited me to come with him to Shenzhen, China. And the reason he needed me to go was to make sure that the new cameras that he wanted to purchase from a new supplier would work in South Africa and work on the systems that we had, etc. So, he paid for my plane ticket. We hopped on a plane and we went to Shenzhen for 3 days. Now, because the guy was very security-minded, he was basically telling me, don't go outside, you don't go walk around by yourself, you don't know where you are, you don't know what's going to go on, what's happening, you know, just stay in the hotel type thing. But that's completely against my nature. I very much enjoy exploring. And so I convinced him, and I also just slipped out and just kind of, oh, I'm just going to go down to the hotel bar or whatever, but then just went and walked out on the streets in the middle of the night in China, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. I'm just going to put in the background a little bit of, this is not very early footage. This is from that PSP travel I was telling you about. We'll get to that in a minute, but I'm just going to show you in the background here quickly. Hopefully you don't get sick from the motion. But anyway, I went out at night, and people were on the streets having beer and barbecue and having a great time, and there was a lot of energy, and there was an amazing vibe. And, you know, I was 25 years old at the time, and at that age, that's all you want in life, is you want to be able to go out and just relax and have fun and party and all that kind of stuff. So I convinced myself after those three days that I really needed to go back to China and find a way to stay there. So flew back to South Africa. Took me a couple of months, but I sold everything. Sold my furniture, sold my cars, sold my TVs, all the usual stuff. And I applied for a business visa. And the way I did this was I contacted one of the factories we'd gone to, and I spoke to my client, and he wanted me to go anyway because I could help him to do some more like research. So we spoke to one of the suppliers and got them to write me an invitation letter and all that kind of stuff. It's a bit crazy. It was much more, well, it was a lot different back then. And I got I believe I got a 30-day visa, which is the max you could get. So off I went to China on my 30-day business visa. I went in, and I went to go and meet the suppliers, you know, at some point. But I really didn't know what I was doing, and I had no clue. So what I did was I went to go and stay in, first of all, the hotel that I'd first stayed in when I went the first time, because I was familiar with the hotel. But then I moved to another hotel. And I moved from hotel to hotel. I had no idea what I was doing. And very quickly, my savings dried up. You know, that's what happens when you're living in hotels. And the average was, for those hotels I was staying in, was between sort of 200 and 400 RMB a night, which back then was a lot of money for me. And it really ate through my savings, like I said. So I ended up in a position where I was running out of money fast. Now, one thing that I've never really mentioned up until this point was the first time I went to China. On that 3-day business meeting, I actually met a girl, and, you know, we kind of had a thing and kept in contact, right? And it's strange, I could speak to her in Japanese, but not Chinese, because at the time I could speak intermediate Japanese, right? And she worked for a Japanese restaurant. In fact, you can see right behind me there, inside that hotel, the airlines hotel, there used to be this fantastic Japanese restaurant, very authentic, called Umeda. And she was one of the waitresses, and I'd gone there, and that was just down. I was actually staying in that hotel that you can see, this, the Guangdong Hotel. That was the hotel I stayed the first time I went to China. So I was right around the corner there. That's how I'd met her and all that kind of stuff. So I kept in contact with her. So she stuck around, and we were having a good time together, and she was kind of showing me around for the first, I'd say, couple of weeks until the money dried up, and then she just disappeared, which was, you know, kind of a hard thing for me to cope with. But I had a feeling that would happen. She did resurface a couple of years later, by the way, when she saw me on TV and she tracked me down, but that's another story for another time. Thing is, here I was in this foreign country where nobody could speak English. You have to understand, when I went there, when I was living there in the beginning in early 2006, nobody could speak English in Shenzhen. You know, nowadays there are plenty of young people that, you know, can speak a middling amount of English, but you won't find them in the service industry. That's the thing. You won't find them behind the newsstand. You won't find them in the restaurants as a waitress or something like that. The people that are usually very well educated, they end up, you know, taking up bigger office jobs or going overseas or whatever it is. So you don't find English-speaking people out there in general in public, right? So it was tough for me, very, very tough, because here I was stuck in a country where I couldn't speak the language, I couldn't read the language. As you can see, everything's just kind of like, what's going on? You don't, you know. I had no more savings. I literally had enough for about a week more of living in a hotel. I had no income, I had no job prospects, and I was in trouble. And I thought the best course of action would be to go and try and find other foreigners in the city and see what they'd managed to do and see if there was a way for me to figure it out. So I started to go online and I found a website set up for expats called ShenzhenParty.com, I believe was the name back in the day. And I figured out like where the expats hung out near me anyway. There was a bar. I can't even remember what it was called, but I went there and I just started to talk to every single expat I could and ask them, you know, how they managed to stay, how they managed to get their visa, all that kind of stuff, you know, trying my best. I'd buy everyone drinks and stuff like that. And of course, I ran out of money very quickly doing that. But that was my plan of action. And through it all, through the grapevine, I met a guy called Jimmy, an American guy who'd left America for suspect reasons I won't get into. But he offered to let me come and stay in his apartment, sleep on the floor for a couple of days or whatever the case. And it was there that I met a Chinese guy. I'm not going to mention his name, actually, because it turned out to be a real scumbag in the end. Anyway, and long story short, it got to a point where I couldn't stay on the floor anymore. I was living in this red light district slum. It was a crazy situation, and I actually became homeless. But I'd been put in contact with an agent. The thing is, for me to get from where I was in the city of Shenzhen to where this agent was located, which was out in the middle of nowhere in Longhua, past the gate, as they used to call it back then, because there used to be this gate for you to get in and out of Shenzhen. It used to be a sealed-off special economic zone, and they used to have armed guards and kind of like a border checkpoint for you to get in and out of the city. And only people with certain permissions and certain, you know, registration documents and stuff could come into Shenzhen at that time. So I had to find my way out there on a bus with the last remaining, like, 2-3 RMB or whatever it was that I had. And it was an adventure. I got completely lost. I got off at the wrong stop. I was walking the streets, and for 2 days, it's kind of a miracle story, to be honest. For 2 days, I was walking around in Longhua with no money, nowhere to stay. And, you know, I had a phone, but it's a phone I bought with me from South Africa, so the Chinese characters didn't work on it. Back then, it was like a Razor, you know, the old Motorola flip phones. But I had no money on my SIM card. I couldn't call anyone. And by some miracle, I survived these couple of days homeless walking around. It was like typhoon season. It was raining and pouring. I remember sleeping in a McDonald's one night because they're 24 hours there, and just kind of walking around. And the agent who had been expecting me just happened to spot me on the side of the road because I kept walking up and down the main roads where I thought I should be. And he spotted me on the side of the road and actually came and got me. He had a car. Which was just like surreal because here I was lost in the middle of nowhere, not being able to speak a thing, homeless for a number of days. And finally, this guy found me. So let me tell you about this agent because it's kind of interesting. China was a very different place back then to what it is now. Everything was corrupt and gray area and under the table and weird. But in a very, I don't know how to even explain it, in a very sort of chaotic but easygoing way. So this agent, he offered me a place to sleep on his couch. And it turns out he did this with a lot of foreigners. He was a Taiwanese guy who was addicted to gambling. And what he'd done is he'd set up a big network in all the kindergartens and, you know, middle schools and so on in the outer side of the city, and a couple in the main part of Shenzhen city as well. So he had a big network of places. And what he'd do is he'd basically just put out those ads online and like, oh, teach in China or teach abroad, you know, type thing. People would contact him and he would, you know, tell them where to go. He'd meet them at the airport type thing because he could speak a little bit of English. I won't say he could speak good English. He could speak a little bit of English. And what he'd do is he'd put them in these illegal jobs because he'd bring people in on tourist visas and stick them in a kindergarten position, for instance. And then he'd get paid by the kindergartner's salary. The teacher would not. He would give them a percentage of their salary. It was ridiculous, actually. I remember he would take something like 40% of the salary. So you'd only end up getting 60% of what the actual salary was. But, he'd help out his teachers by helping them when they couldn't understand how to pay their rent and all that. He would tell them how to do it and help them and all that kind of stuff. So he's like an agent there. So he got me some jobs teaching these kindergartens in the middle of Longhua and out there in the middle of nowhere. And it was probably one of the worst times of my life, I'm not going to lie. Because he had me getting on public buses, these little mini buses they had out there, and driving about 2 or 3 hours in a single direction. Go and teach in the morning there for about 3 hours or 2 hours, get on a bus and travel another hour in another direction for like an afternoon class or two there, and then drive somewhere else and do another class, and then drive back and get home late, at night to his place. And I was doing this for about a year, I'd say. He finally bumped me up and got me to a well-known kindergarten inside the city, not out the gate. So downtown Lohu area, which was pretty fantastic. And, the kindergarten was pretty good. But again, I was being completely rinsed. I was getting, the kindergarten was paying 10,000 RMB for me as a monthly salary to him. And I was getting 6, 5, 8, something like that. Anyway, while I was staying at his place, he had another South African there, and who, under some very dodgy circumstances, ended up there too. We kind of made friends, and we went and we were working in the same kindergarten. We saved up all our money, and we actually put down a deposit and moved into a better house, like an actual apartment, my first real apartment. And that's when things started to get a little better, So we were staying in this apartment. We both pulled our money together to get in there. And we had no money left over. I remember it was crazy. We were doing things like not using hot water so that we could save money on utilities, that kind of thing. But we kind of scraped our way up. He left after about a year, though, to go to Taiwan, to go there and teach in Taiwan and whatnot. But I stayed and took over the rent. And by then, I'd started to do part-time jobs and earn a little extra money on the side and so on and so forth. And finally, I went and got a job for the Rapist. I don't know if you've seen that video of mine, but I worked for this big company called CCVIP. And it was a very different kind of a situation there. I've got a whole video about it, but that was a decent salary, and I was finally being paid, my full salary, which at the time was, I believe, around about 12 or 13,000 RMB, which is a lot of money for back then in 2007. That's when I started making these videos. This was done in 2007. So I was currently at this point in time here working for the Rapist school. And I'd finally found my feet. Now, being able to earn a stable salary, living in a nice apartment, the visa situation in China was never stable for me. It was always up and down. All the different, depends who you work for and so on. It's a lot of corruption involved. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. And it's one of the parts of China that you kind of, you live with it. You figure it out as you go along. You're either paying dodgy agents under the table and they take your passport away and you get it back like a month later with a visa in it, or they're sending you to some random village hometown somewhere where the boss, that Rapist boss, has connections with the police chief there, so he gets the visas done through that hometown. That kind of crap. You're sitting on a train and you have to come back to the city without your passport because it stays up in Jinan, where he was from, that kind of thing. Anyway, you get to see how China really works. Coming from South Africa, I'm kind of used to the corruption in the government and the police and everything. So for me, it was pretty easy to just sail through this stuff and figure it out. And I hate seeing myself when I'm younger because, I'm not that thin anymore. Anyway, fact of the matter is, you get to see how China really works. And I started this little PSP Traveler thing that you see behind me now with somebody that I helped over. When I finally found my feet in China, I realized that there was a lot of opportunity there. So I reached out. That's the 2008 Olympics being played up on that screen, by the way. That's when I shot this particular video. It was during the Olympics. I started the PSP Traveler in 2007. This is 2008. This is one of the later videos. Anyway, so let me get back to that. When I found my feet and I saw the opportunity, I reached out to a lot of my friends back home who I knew were kind of having trouble finding jobs or just not having a good time of it. So I actually managed to convince a number of people to come over to China, and I found them jobs. I helped them settle, and helped them get through all the crap so that they didn't have to go through what I had to go through when I first got to China. And it was during this time that I decided to make these videos. I thought this would be a great idea. Why don't I just, this guy who's with me right now, he could do a little bit of video editing. We got those PSP cameras. I was like, this could be fun. Let's just film, and then, we can show people what it's really like and share our experiences and stuff. So we started this. But like everyone that I've worked with in the past, barring C-Milk, he's the exception. The guy I was working with ran out of steam. He didn't want to go out and film anymore. He didn't want to have to edit. I had to hound him to edit and so on and so forth. So I thought, screw it. If I'm going to do this, I'll just do it myself. And that's when I started the SerpentZA channel. That's where it all started. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the SerpentZA channel and the crazy journey that it's been. And I guess I should just start at the beginning, I started with those pokey little videos of me messing around on scooters and trying food and so on and so forth. And, the main reason I did it was to show a lot of concerned friends and family back home that, what, China's not as bad as you think. It's actually really fun and interesting and vibrant. There's a lot of things going on. And I was feeling very positive about China back then because I could see it change before my eyes and open up. And, it was a friendly place and it was a fun place to be. And, I didn't have a grasp of the language yet. By then I could have, speak phrases and order food and stuff. But, I didn't really fully understand the language. I couldn't read much. And, of course, I saw many issues during these times. I have to be honest. I saw a lot of, really bad things. During the time where I became homeless and I was living in that red light district, I saw human trafficking firsthand in China. It's one of the most heartbreaking things I'd ever seen in my life. My Chinese friend's girlfriend was a prostitute that had been sold to her pimp. And she was paying off the debt, but all her extra money that she was making, other than paying off the debt, was being sent back to her hometown, her rural hometown, to pay for her brother's education. So the parents had sold their daughter into prostitution and still expected her to pay for her brother's education because of the whole preference for boys. It was sickening. I'd seen some horrible things and I'd experienced some terrible things, but I'd always brushed them aside because I could see China opening up. I wanted to give China a fair shake. The positives still outweighed the negatives for me, So for me, I was very happy to just continue showing the fun, interesting, positive things and ignore the very real and in-your-face societal problems and issues that I experienced. And that can explain, hopefully, to a lot of you why I was so positive in the beginning of my channel. Also, you have to take into consideration the honeymoon phase. When you go to a new place, everything's wonderful and different and interesting and, all that kind of nonsense. And you have to justify to yourself and others why you've made this choice to move across the world to another country. So anyway, things started to get better and better as far as my channel's concerned. As far as views and interest, I should say. I couldn't monetize my channel. I think I only monetized my channel for the first time in about 2014, 2015, thereabouts, if I remember correctly. And that's only when YouTube decided to allow anyone to monetize their channel. Before that, I couldn't. So I was just doing it out of passion. And people would send me messages and they'd ask me questions like, hey, what's it like to live in China? Is rent expensive? Can you buy a car? What's it like to study in China? What's it like to be in a relationship with a Chinese person? So what I'd do is I'd take all these questions and they would give me ideas to make videos. And that's what I'd do, is I'd go and make videos based on those questions. And that brings us to the first ever controversial video that I got a lot of pushback on. And that is my video titled, Are Chinese Girls Easy? It's a question, by the way. And it's the title. That's all. That's all that really rubbed people up the wrong way, because the video itself is actually very benign. If you watch the video, it's straightforward. I suggest you do watch it, by the way, if you haven't. all it says is that, yes, it's very easy to get into a relationship in China. And it is. I mean, I got into a relationship in the first 3 days I was in China. So that's proof, right? During the video, I'm approached by random girls on the street as well. That's some more proof right there. So it's easy to strike up conversations, easy to get into a relationship. But the relationships aren't easy. The whole idea of casual relationships is not a thing in China. At least, maybe it is more these days, but definitely not back then. If you get into a relationship, you know, within a couple of weeks, you probably hear the word marriage being thrown around. You know, it's different. You know, Chinese culture is all about getting married young, having children. There's a lot of pressure from the parents and the grandparents and all that. So it's a very different situation. So the video really just tells people that, yes, it's easy to get into a relationship, but it's not an easy thing to do. And it's not an easy relationship to be a part of. And you have to take it seriously. And you have to respect the traditions, etc., etc. So the video itself, like I said, is not bad. But the title, I guess it's because a lot of people cannot distinguish the difference between a question and a statement. Because if I were to ask you a question, for instance, is the moon green? It's different from me saying the moon is green. You see, it's two different things. So asking the question, are Chinese girls easy, is different from saying Chinese girls are easy. See the difference? But most people didn't see that difference. And it could be a language barrier thing. It could be just, I don't know what it is, but it really, really pissed off the ultra-nationalists. Because, you know, unfortunately, there's a big thing in China with, you know, the fact that there's a women's shortage in China. And on top of that, there's a lot of kind of, I don't know how to put it, but really these ultra-nationalist kind of incel types. And they are all about like, these foreigners are coming in and stealing our women. You know, that's their whole thing. So they see a video title like that and they immediately explode. And so I saw a lot of pushback from that. But you know what? It died down and things continued as per usual. And I kept making videos, kept growing my audience, and things were doing pretty good. The thing is, I did start to see some awful things and how bad the Chinese government can be. It used to affect me a lot. In fact, it affected me a lot around this time, believe it or not. This was just before this is during the Olympics, but just before I shot this video, before the 2008 Olympics happened, quite a bit before, in fact, so even in 2007 still, they started to crack down on foreigners. And I mean big time. First of all, they forced everybody who was going to renew a visa could no longer renew your visa in Hong Kong or so on. You had to fly back to your home country. And in fact, that was the only time I ever went back to South Africa, was for 7 days in 2007. I haven't been back since. So they forced everyone to fly home. They used to check up a lot. I used to get knocks on the door at 11 p.m. and there'd be like 8, 9 policemen. They'd come into my house, check my papers, all that kind of stuff. When the torchbearer was running through Shenzhen, I was studying at the Shenzhen University at that time. We were studying that morning in the Shenzhen University, and we were told that if we didn't leave within the next 5 minutes, we'd be locked in. Because what they were doing was they were locking all the foreigners in the university. Were not allowed to leave campus because they were concerned that foreigners were going to go and interfere with the torch. Because there'd been some, in France and England, I believe, there'd been some people trying to extinguish the torch, you know, and saying free Tibet and that kind of thing, right? So they were worried that foreigners were going to meddle. So they locked the foreigners in the university. So I got to see firsthand some of these things, and it was very, very disturbing. It was kind of telling about what was to come in the future. But again, I ignored it. Positives outweighing the negatives, right? Anyway, let's fast forward. I kept making videos. Everything was going well. And it got to a point where I could now read and write the language pretty well. I could understand Chinese fairly well, enough that I could now keep track of what was going on in the news and, you know, what people were talking about online and, you know, what my clients were telling me and what my friends and Chinese colleagues and stuff were telling me. And it got to a point where I started to get really annoyed. There were some very glaring societal issues, such as kidnapping, for instance. I'll use that as an example, which were affecting my friends. and their families and, the local Chinese people around me. And, being brought up in a Western society, and, South Africa, yes, it's not the West, but it's a European. It's based on, ex-British, Dutch rule, that kind of stuff. So it's got the same laws and the same ideas and the same basic culture, I could say. You grow up in a society where if there's something bad going on, you talk about it, you discuss it, you bring it to people's attention so that it can be fixed, Because if nobody talks about something, it never gets fixed, right? It'll just be continuing on the same way. And I found that these very big issues just were never talked about. So I started to talk about them. I made videos about the kidnapping in China, for instance. And man, people didn't like that. Because they've got a thing in China. They got a saying. It's jia qiu bu ke wai yang, which means the ugliness of the house cannot be shown outside. And that very perfectly explains China as it is today. And well, in modern China, I should say. And that is, it's okay for Chinese people to talk about the ugly things going on in China within them by themselves. But a foreigner talking about it and telling other people about it, that's not okay. So that's when I started to see a big downward spiral. But you also have to understand that Xi Jinping had come into power and things were changing. Those communist symbols, which when I first got to Shenzhen were being taken down. They used to have those big one-child policy banners on the buildings and the hammer and sickle all over the place, but they started to be taken down and replaced with beautiful murals or artwork or just, whatever. You go into the park, you wouldn't have to see a freaking commie flag flying there anymore. You just see like a Shenzhen Park flag or something. And that's one of the reasons why I was so positive, is I saw the bad old stuff being taken down and progress. So that stuff, unfortunately, started to come back. You started to see the hammer and sickle a lot more. You started to see a lot more of the old propaganda stuff popping up and this whole national pride thing starting to really ramp up again. And it was just kind of getting a little uncomfortable, when this sort of thing happened. But I continued and I weathered the storm. It was pretty tough. I'd get attacked quite often, not only online, but, later on they would do things like attack my wife, go to her workplace to try and find her. At one point, they started a letter writing campaign where they wrote to the Public Security Bureau, to the government security organs. They wrote to the medical board of Shenzhen and to the hospitals and bosses that she worked for, saying that she was a foreign sympathizer and a spy. And I guess they were trying to intimidate me into silence, but they were also trying to possibly get her jailed, and in order to silence me, that kind of thing. Because that's how the Communist Party works, and that's obviously these horrible trolls, they pick up on that and they try to employ the same tactics. Anyway, it started to get a bit bad. But in around about 2014, I believe it was, I got contacted by China Radio International, which is a state broadcaster, and they do propaganda and so on. And they were doing a series, about notable South Africans living in China. Because at that time, there was a big deal being signed between the Chinese government and the South African government. So in order to kind of promote this whole thing, they did a whole series about successful South Africans living in China. So I came onto their radar. They came down to interview me. I remember I had 38,000 subscribers at the time, which to me was huge. And it still was the biggest YouTube channel in China, if not one of the only ones. There were very few at the time. They came down to interview me. And one of the cameramen was a British guy who later became a very good friend of mine. And we kind of hit it off, and we had drinks, and we were talking about this. And they came to film my motorcycle shop that I ran with Sea Milk, up in Huizhou. And that was part of the whole little thing. And it was fun. So anyway, this guy, this British guy, and myself, we discussed the fact that I used to do motorcycle adventures because, I had the motorcycle shop. I used to build my own bikes and ride around China. That's something I'd been doing for years. Whenever I had a holiday or time off, rather than fly out to Thailand or whatever that most foreigners do to, get a change of scenery. I'd hop on a bike and I would ride as far as I could. So I'd ride up to, into different provinces, into Hunan and up into Guangxi and Yunnan and wherever I could, as far as I could, given the amount of free days I had. So he came up with this idea, how about we do a travel documentary? And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome, but we're going to have to rope in C-Milk on this deal because, when we go on these rides, he comes along too. And they were like, that's fantastic. I think C-Milk had 7,000 subs at the time or something ridiculous like that. But we went out and we just got on bikes. We rented cameras, and him and another guy, 2 cameramen, and ourselves, we just hopped on bikes and we went. And we filmed this fantastic documentary, Conquering Southern China. And the reason it stands out as being good, in my mind, is the fact that we didn't have filming permissions. We didn't approach any government ever to say, hey, can we film here or anything. We didn't approach anything. We just went. And, we stumbled across people and asked, hey, can we film this? Can we do that? And whatever. And we just kind of did it. And it's natural. And even people who really hated me at the time, when they watched that documentary, they even admitted that it was a fantastic documentary. And I remember specifically there was, can't remember if it was called the Shanghai something magazine. I have the article here, hidden away or stored somewhere, but they really hated me. I don't know. There was a thing about a lot of the expats really didn't like me back then. I don't know what it was. It was just, but they didn't like me. But even they wrote an article saying that this is probably the best China travel documentary they've ever seen. And the person who wrote that article, even in there begrudgingly, they said, like, no, don't usually like what SerpentZA does, but this was good. So we knew we were on the right track. And the whole point is we wanted to show the good parts of China that we had experienced. You know what I mean? The hospitality of the rural people, the scenery, the interesting things that are actually fun and an adventure, not the bullshit, look at this high-speed rail and look at this skyscraper and poverty alleviation. No, none of these like horrible propaganda, talking point, boring government things. We wanted to go out and show people living in China what it's like in all the rural southern parts of China. And we succeeded in that. And so a couple of years later, we did Conquering Northern China together, which was another big documentary, which, of course, was a hell of a thing to film. And we didn't get permission either that time. We just organized what we wanted to do and we went off, we really pushed the limits on that one. I knew China very well and how to navigate China and how to get past all the dodginess, and C-Milk did too. And, our Chinese ability was good and we knew what we were doing. And even with that, we really ran into a lot of problems. We were going to sensitive areas though. We went onto the border of North Korea. Man, that was hairy. We had to sneak in there and sneak right back out and film ourselves there and quickly, within 20 minutes before anyone turned up, and get on the bikes and go. But we went to the border of North Korea. We went on the border of Russia. We went on the border of Mongolia, and we had run-ins with the People's Liberation Army, which almost ended up in us being detained. It was really bad. With a SWAT team that busted into our hotel room, with police investigators who had flown out from Beijing specifically to come and question us, with a Communist Party local head who came to investigate all this crap. It was really, really, really touch and go. Anyway, after conquering northern China, C-Milk was forced to leave China. He's got a whole video about how he escaped. And I was left by myself for about 1.5 years, I'd say, in China, right? Now, during that time, I decided, and with my buddy, the producer, decided that we wanted to do one more documentary. And this was going to be, I knew the writing was on the wall. I was making plans to leave. I knew I had to leave. My acquaintance Michael Spaver had just been detained and disappeared. Somebody who I had been speaking to on WeChat, somebody who's got direct contact with me, right? And I knew that I was in trouble and that if I didn't get out of China, it would be me next, you know. And the negativity had ramped up massive around me. There were forums out there trying their best to try and disrupt my life and trying to get me into trouble with the law and reporting me as a spy and all this other crap. And I'd been visited by the police a bunch of times. And I was just getting to a point where I knew I had to leave. So this last documentary was very difficult to film. This time it was a smaller crew. Of course, C-Milk wasn't along. Still the same camera guy and producer. This time we used, less professional equipment. We didn't go and rent very expensive cameras. We actually ended up using my Sony a7 III and another professional camera kind of in tandem. And it was a little scaled back, you could say, but not really. We still did the whole thing. We went to all these different cities. We got the drone footage. I flew the drone, for a lot of it. Not all of it, but I flew the drone for some of it. We filmed everything. We went to the 4 biggest cities, the first-tier cities in China, and it was fantastic. And this video, this documentary, which came out fantastic, by the way, it's still one of my proudest moments. It's like my swan song, my ode to China, so to speak. It was my last hurrah, where I got to try and show the positive things in China, the people who go against the grain, the people that are doing important things in China, you know? And it was shortly after this documentary was finished that I actually had to leave China. No longer being in China allowed me to use my vast library of video that I had taken. I have so much footage that I haven't released yet. On top of that, all of the experiences that I'd had in China. I could now start talking about the things that I could not talk about when I was still there. I'm just getting started here, and I'm so happy to have you along for the journey. Thank you so much for being a part of this incredible adventure, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, as always, you know the drill. Stay awesome.